what will absolutely be a really exciting conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anastasia. Just before we start, I am going to put those SPRC links in the chat just for anyone external that wants to look at some of our past seminars or sessions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this book launch. Highly anticipated. Such a fantastic book. But I'm just here to oversee the technical aspects of this session, and I'm going to pass it over to our chair, Professor Anastasia Christou from Middlesex University. Anastasia, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much, Rima. I'm so grateful for all your support, and I'm just absolutely thrilled to be facilitating this book celebration. It's just so amazing to have the space to hear about the incredible work that our colleague Luis has done. And I'll start by introducing our guest author, and then our discussant, and then give them space to reflect on this really thrilling and engaging work. And then after that, we'll have plenty of time for wider discussions, interactions, any questions, any reflections. And hopefully the technology will be kind to us. But it's my absolute privilege and really pleasure and excitement to introduce Dr. Luis Eduardo Perez Murcia, who is a research fellow at the University of Manchester's Global Development Institute. And his work explores the intersections of forced migration, conflict, and homemaking. Luis is currently investigating the transnational dynamics of care, aging, and home among migrant populations across Latin America and Europe. All the stuff that I dream of every day. Fantastic themes and topics. And I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our discussant, Dr. Evgenia Iliadou, who is an associate lecturer and visiting fellow in the School of Law and Social Sciences here at Middlesex University. Evgenia's work sits at the intersections of critical migration and border studies, critical criminology, sociology, and social anthropology. Evgenia examines implicit and explicit forms of border violence, focusing on institutionalized neglect, abandonment, and border-related deaths, as well as epistemic injustice. So very much fit and aligned with the epistemological, theoretical, and wider fields of discourse and discussion in Luis's book. And I can't wait to hear some of those insights. Luis, the floor is all yours.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry, Luis, I think you've muted.
Yes,
and now I'm
no.
going to mute myself.
Thank you so much. So I will start just sharing my presentation. Just 1 second. I don't know whether you see now my presentation.
It's visible if you just want to make it in presentation mode.
Okay, just 1 second. What is happening here?
Just further down, right there, yes.
Yes, I can move. Okay, yes. Now probably yes. It's okay?
Right, yes, perfect. Please go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anastasia, for making all of this possible, as well as Rina and Evgenia for the willingness to comment on my book. I am so pleased to be here. And so, yes, thank you so much for all your efforts to make this book launch possible. So today I am going to introduce the book, probably talking about 25 minutes. And my ambition is to give you an outline of the book, what the book is about, what are the key themes, the research questions, sharing a little bit about the methodology, and then going into some of the empirical findings. I'm just ending my presentation with some of the key contributions. Well, first of all, I want to start talking about these slides. I have been using this image for many years in my research. The first time probably at the Global Development Institute when doing my PhD. And why I have been consistently using these slides, because it is indeed a tapestry made by displaced women in Colombia, and this tapestry depicts the experience of a community in Mampujar, Maria la Baja, in Montes de Maria, Colombia. Is a community who fled following violence and human rights abuses. As you can see in the tapestry, which title is Desplazamiento in Spanish, displacement, people fled because of violence and human rights abuses. In this particular context, the real massacre, the mass killing, paramilitary groups arrive at the communities, killing people, raping women, and people just flee, leaving everything what they had been working for their entire life behind. So I was trying to understand what is the meaning of living in a place in which you have been socially, culturally, and emotionally embedded perhaps for your entire life, and how is the process of trying to find a new life away from the community in which you feel at home. So my research engages with the temporal spatial dynamics between conflict, displacement, and home. What I really want to understand is what is home for people who fled human rights abuses, and where is home for people who move within national borders. Most of the scholarly research at the time I was doing my research, for example, for my PhD, talk about home, but when people cross national borders. So I was kind of surprised when looking at the experience of displacement or research in terms of forced displacement within national borders, that the idea of home was largely absent. Somehow was taken for granted that people stay at home because they were living in their country. But the problem is that people can experience the sense of losing home even when they move within the same neighborhood, within the same community. So I wanted to look at the temporal and spatial aspects to see what happened with this idea of home. At the end, what I am trying to bring is the idea of home for looking at process of displacement and emplacement. This placement, so place became a very important aspect, and placement, place again plays a significant role. So I am drawing here on Professor David Thornton's suggestion that place is a very central aspect for understanding displacement and emplacement and the way people navigate their lives in different places. So just to give you a taste of my my theoretical background, because I was missing the idea of home in internal displacement research, so I went to refugee studies and really find fascinating the work by Anna Arendt, talking about her own experience of being a refugee, being deported to a Nazi concentration camp, and she highlights how what is vital or essential in the experience of people who are forced to move for the, human rights abuses is the loss of a sense of home. In my reading on Arendt, I never found where she conceptualized home. So she just put the idea of home, but put something else. So what is essentially the loss of a sense of home and the impossibility for people to experience home again if they don't return. So I am very happy with the first part of the argument. I do believe that home is significant for understanding experience of displacement. It doesn't matter if you cross or not borders. However, I disagree with the argument that the only way to recover a sense of home is going back to people's place of origin. And then I find Lisa Malki's work very important, questioning the idea of national order or themes and inviting us to think about home, culture, identity, and belonging beyond the national boundaries. And I do believe this is relevant in the case of internal displacement. And then Professor Oliver Baywell, he was finishing his PhD, and at the end of his PhD, he wrote something like, perhaps we are so obsessed about categories, looking at refugees, internally displaced people, asylum seekers, for what purposes? Maybe with this idea of the durable solution, when people just go back to different places, and when that displacement comes to an end. So Oliver Baywell suggested perhaps this idea of home can tell us something about whether people became inverted commas socially integrated, part of a community, develop a sense of identity or belonging. So all these elements play around in the way I conceptualize home in my research. There is not really time to go into the details, but I will say that this is basically interdisciplinary research. My PhD is in development studies, which is basically looking at different areas of research. So I draw on critical geographies of home, reflections about place and space, anthropology, sociology, cultural studies, and more recently, aging studies. And with all these elements, I develop a conceptual framework that conceptualizes home as a multidimensional, relational, and dynamic space. So what is multidimensional? Multidimensional means basically that home is material and non-material at the same time. As Anastasia has conceptualized long time ago, it is a very imaginative space, something that can travel, for example, with you when you move, or something that you just remember. So memories, ideas are also very important, and these non-material aspects play a fundamental role in the way people remember home, remake home in a different community. Also, I am conceptualizing home as a relational space. So we need to look at home, as Alison Blonde and Dowling by us, at different scales: the domestic space, the local, the community, the city, the country, and maybe connecting to the world. So this relational space, in that sense, connect us with ideas of cultural identity and belonging, which is a very, very important aspect, perhaps everywhere. But in the particular case of Colombia, indigenous and Afro-Colombians had been very affected by the conflict, and they had their very different rituals, social and cultural practices that helped them to develop a sense of home in particular places and not in others. And finally, the idea of dynamic bring the time into the discussion. For many years, scholars on home has call into attention the importance of looking at time. And in this particular case study, we are talking about protected displacement. So I had been working with people who fled from the 1985. So people who had been living in displacement for 10, 20, 30, or 40 years. So the way people narrate home, the way they remember home, or the idea of home they used to have before or and after displacement could be very different. And Lisa Malky highlights very often refugees and displaced people tend to narrate their lives before and after a particular moment. And in this case, the particular moment is displacement. So just to give you an idea of the context of my research, I developed my research in Colombia in three different cities. But before, I want to explain the map. In the map, you see some red points. So red areas. The red areas are the places where people were forced to live. So I had people from different areas of the country. As I already mentioned, people from indigenous communities, Afro-Colombians, and mestizos, that is exactly my ethnicity. Civilians were under attack. All the people who took part in this research suffered at least one human rights abuses, and in many cases, many human rights abuses. I am talking about children who were forcibly recruited, children who witnessed the murders of their parents, family members forced disappearance, women who were consistently victims of rape, and people who fled after mass killings. So all these different, I try to understand to one extent the reason for moving play a role in the way people relate to home. I call this ethnography an ethnography of multiple places, multiple faces, and multiple temporalities. What I mean by that, first of all, is a multi-site ethnography. I conducted the research in three cities. In the center of the country is Bogota, the green point on the left is Medellin, and in the Caribbean coast, the yellow one is Cartagena. So in these different cities, I conducted research at three very different moments. First of all, when doing my PhD at the University of Manchester in 2014, I spent 9 months in the field working with the families. But then I finalized my thesis, I mean the PhD in 2016, but I continue in contact with the families. And in 2017, I traveled back to Colombia to present the research findings to participants and got the opportunity to reconnect with them and continue gathering data. At that time, I was anticipating that I really wanted to do this long-term ethnography to develop the project, meaning the book. So then I continue while working in another project with some of the families, with the key research participants, having online conversations. And in 2022 and 2023, I went again to the field and conducted again a new fieldwork. So in total, it's 10 years working with key research participants from the same families. But what is the rationale of that? In my understanding, home cannot really be properly understood when you just take a picture. You need to really follow up the life experience of people to see whether and how, for example, the experience of violence come back and again and creates different feelings and attitudes towards the places they believe are home. So why multiple faces? Because I interview people from different regions of the country, from different ethnicities, from different states in the life course, and in somewhere in this 10 years time of the research, I have been aging with the research participants. So looking different, the same things probably from different lenses. In terms of practical methodological tools, I use oral history, narrative interviews, participant observation, mainly in domestic spaces. And in the last part of the fieldwork, 2023, 2 and 23, I engaged with object-related interviews and walking alone interviews, which I do believe were significant for understanding everyday practices of home and homemaking. Well, what about the theoretical foundations of my ethnography? Very quickly, I am very inspired by Laura Hammond and Peter Loiso's long-term field research on home and homemaking in different contexts. And I learned a lot from Laura Hammond just talking about ordinary things. Even when you feel that you are not doing your research and you become so concerned, I am really doing the research or just spending time with people. I completely agree with Laura Hammond. When you feel that, it's probably a very good thing for your research because you are entering into the everyday life of individuals and it's there when you can learn about the different meanings of home. I use this very inspiring idea of Georgia Dew alternative politics of research to navigate these very difficult boundaries between becoming friends with research participants, taking care of them in the meaning that you are hearing their narratives and they trust you to share their narratives. So the politics of hearing is very well interlinked with this because at the end, what I was doing is, as a researcher, is from my PhD to now, is learning how to really hear people voices, how to allow them enough space to narrate their lives, and myself to try to understand through questions, observing, and many of these things. And this point is very important because when you work with participants for 10 years, and this idea of becoming Peter Loisos put this straight away ethnographer as a vampire, just extracting information. So you are really afraid of being that. And because you are becoming friends. So the question of where are you asking too much or being intrusive in the people's life is a question. Happy to reflect on that if you want. So I am using this photo and I am very aware that you are perhaps seeing very little, but this is my intention, just to show you the different colors, the different texture, the different places I navigate during my fieldwork. And the same with this photo, the different faces, the different expressions, the different ethnicities of the people who participated in my research. Well, the structure of the book, and as I said, this is an invitation for you to read the book. The introduction is basically what I have already mentioned. And then we have a conceptual chapter, the first chapter, talking about displacement and placement and how the idea of home can contribute to this debate. Then you will have three empirical chapters. I will briefly talk about them now. One is losing home. How is life when you lose the place that you consider is your home? The second empirical chapter, I call that struggle for place, home, and humanity. Place again, very important. But then this link between home and humanity. To one extent, we often take for granted that no matter what happens, individuals all the time feel connected to the sense of humanity. I learned that many people struggle to see themselves as human beings because of the human rights abuses and because of the loss of home. And creating a home is about the process of remaking your life in a different place and trying to connect with your idea of home, with this imagination of home, or with the actual basis of a home in a new place. And the last chapter is kind of the discussion of the contributions. I call it dislocation, liminality, and remaking home. Liminality has become a very important aspect in my research, and indeed, part of my argument, I am now moving into the empirical findings, is that what I found in the field is the displacement or the really disruptive sense of home overnight. But people can spend 10, 20, 30 years trying to find a new home. And in that process, the idea of liminal space helped me to understand what is that. Because the process of remaking home can take all your life, and if ever, maybe people just die without feeling at home again. So I am using this idea of Victor Turner and Arnold van Ginev suggesting the ritual of changing of place. In this context, if somebody forced you because of violence and human rights abuses to change the place. So you leave the place you call home, then navigate for many years, something that is to be, people think is temporal, for maybe 1 month, 2 months, 1 year, living away from your community. But then you realize that it's happened 40 years and you can never return to that place. So then how you use your creativity and imagination and more broadly, your agency to remake the sense of home. So in these 10 minutes I have, I will draw on the life experience of a single research participant, which is indeed the person I decide, I draw on his life story to develop the introduction of the book. Well, this is Mateo. Mateo is a person who I met in Medellin in the House of the Memory Museum in 2014. I was doing participant observation and I saw Mateo, who at that time was a guide tour in the museum, talking about the different artifacts related to violence and human rights abuses. And what captured my attention is that he was so emotionally embedded, talking about every piece. So at the end, when he was finalizing his tour, I approached him and asked about his experience, why he was doing that. And in that conversation, I learned that he was a displaced person and victims of human rights abuses. So Mateo was displaced 3 times. The first time because he was at risk of being forcibly recruited. Then he went back to the community because he wanted to be with the family, learned that the family was absolutely dispersed because they also suffered human rights abuses. Then he tried to return again for the third time, but his brother was killed. So he said, at that time when my brother was killed, I felt like very lucky because it could be me. So I decided just to move and to start a new life in a different place. So talking now about Mateo's life history, one of the part of the conversation that I really captured my attention was when Mateo told me that place, the place left behind, was my world. It was my home. He immediately connected the world and the home as Alison Bloom and Dowling. So the different scales of home were already in the way he speaks about home. So my question for him was, what do you mean by home, Mateo? Mateo, home is a sanctuary, is a tabernacle where the individual confesses and takes communion. This has a very strong religious connotation, which is very common in many people in Colombia. But then he added, home is where you find yourself and your source of strength. And I found this very relevant because home connects with the idea of the self, with the sense of humanity, and when the individuals can find the source of strength. Meaning, perhaps when you are displaced, you are struggling to find yourself and the strength you need to live everyday life. So, losing home, how does is this experience or how people experience that? So, I lost my home. I lost everything that is essential for human life. I lost a reason to live. So, big word here. Losing a sense of home is parallel with the idea of losing a reason to live. So I wanted to know more about what do you mean by that? And he explained to me that he spent a little bit, 2 weeks living in the streets of Medellin, but then he was able to find a place to stay. However, the idea of the home didn't just came out. He need to wait for 30 years to remake home. So he said, I didn't see home. I saw only sadness, always longing for my hometown. I experienced a sense of being in a foreign land in the wrong place. So lots of important aspects here. I didn't see home, only sadness. Sadness become very important in the narratives of displaced people, which connects with, for example, memories of exile or life in exile by Edward said, talking about you can really rebuild the house. You can create an income that is even better than the one you had before or achieve a better education. But the feeling of being displaced can perhaps not be surmounted because you feel that something is missed. And I feel and I have learned from many research participants that even when they become inverted commas successful in many things, they are always missing exactly what Matteo is talking about, the sense of being in the right place rather than out of place. So living without a home, where is home? Matteo told me, living without a home is a sad experience, sadness again. So you need put this one here. Okay, you need to permanently ask yourself where to end and start the day. Where am I? Where can I go? Who am I? It is an empty word. However, living without a home opens the door for other questions. How can I move forward? How can I find life? The word he used also for hope, and how I keep fighting. Is the light signal for both stopping and moving forward? So sad became again, and this idea of the empty word. So that is the reason I draw on Arnold van Ginder and Tony the idea of liminality. In this empty word, doesn't mean that you are not an agent, but doesn't mean that you are kind of confused or not struggling to see what is next in your life. What happened here? Okay. So he also paralleled the idea of living without a home with the sense of being homeless, but not in terms of the physical shelter. He had told me displacement made me homeless, and so I need to make a new home. Here there is a very interesting point that he recognized how displacement had disrupted the idea of home, but at the same time, he said had the possibility to create new ideas, new questions, and the possibility for him to create a home somewhere else. So he said, what is lost, the law is lost. The loss of home can be recovered, but you can make a new home in another place. So Mateo was selected for opening the book because I interviewed more than 100 people for this research, 72 of them internally displaced people, and just a few were able to move into these three processes of losing, living without, and remaking home. So Mateo was selected in particular for that because for many years he was trying to rebuild the home, 30 years. And finally, the last time I interviewed him in 2023, he told me, I now feel that Medellin is my home, my new world. But why this happened? Medellin is our new world. We have new ideas and new questions here. Our life project didn't come to an end with displacement. We gave birth to a new life project. It is like a new beginning. I personally feel in my work again, in my place. I feel that this place is now my home. So this is the landscape Mateo sees now in his community in Medellin. And what I want to mention now is the importance of the emotions and the time and space in this process of remaking home. And he was offering me a reflection about what he had learned sharing his time with other displaced people. He is the co-founder of a neighborhood of about 400 families, most of them internally displaced people, and nowadays with many people displaced or refugees from Venezuela. And he mentioned that he had learned that with people staying short to the past, the possibility to see the future is really, there is no possibility. We see the future nowhere. So Mateo told me, I decide to live the present, to focus my mind on what can achieve today. This mentality played a very important role in the process of using the imagination and the creativity in the process of remaking home. And Mateo stressed Looking at the past made me feel sad and even feel the horror of the war, memories of the violence. Looking at the future is meaningless for me. It is uncertain. It is something I haven't experienced. So I also keep the future out on my mind. Meaning of all of this. The present is the way in which Mateo wanted to build a home for right now, for the very moment. So, and he stressed, when you are able to remain home, you feel as a human again. Human beings are still human beings after displacement. He said, I am just playing my part as a human being. But many people in that whose experience I discuss in the book struggle to feel at home again because they can find their sense of humanity. And this is particularly the case of women who were raped. Many women thought that the body was the home. So when they are raped, they struggle to navigate their own body. And of course, you can move from one house to another, from one city to another, but you can physically move from one body to another. Spiritually, and depending on your faith, you can do that. But for now, they have to live within the same body. So the material, social, the spatial, and spiritual aspects play a significant role. And because I only have 1 minute, I will say the emotional, spiritual, and existential aspect have been really overlooked in a lot of research about conflict-induced displacement. So we need to look at the emotions, the spiritual sense of being at home, and how people reveal their lives through these lenses. My life is like two. What this book is going into conversation with. First of all, bringing home to the analysis of internal displacement, an aspect that in my view was missed because we have a lot of focus on poverty, poverty traps, and confusing the idea of living in poverty with living in situations of displacement, despite they are interrelated. Temporal and spatial disjunctions between losing, living without, and remaking home. So I am not suggesting that people move from one stage to another. There are temporal and spatial disruptions that we need to take into consideration. And finally, this book is trying to highlight the dark sides of home to problematize return. We often take for granted that people, while they are struggling to remain home in a new place, is because they want to go back. This is not really the case on most of my research participants. When you have witnessed the murder of your parents in that place, or you have been raped, or victim of human rights abuses, perhaps the only thing that you want is not really going back there. You want to create a new life somewhere else. So gender, ethnicity, and the life codes play a significant role in the way people navigate the time in which they have been displaced. And I have learned from many participants that they were at the very beginning concerned about aging in displacement, but nowadays very concerned not just about aging, but also dying without feeling the sense of being at home again. Last point, material cultures, everyday materialities, very symbolic things play a very important role in the ways individuals experience home and imagine home in the present and in the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Luis. That was such an amazing journey of the incredible and extensive contributions that your book makes. And it was very moving, quite emotive. These topics can be triggering for colleagues, so please do self-care during any discussions of displacement where there's also the violences of displacement in the experience. I have so much to say, but it's not my platform. It's for Dr. Evgenia Iliadou to now give us some reflections and discuss the wider book. Thank you very much, Evgenia, for your time and contribution. The space is all yours.
So thank you very much for the invitation to discuss this thoughtful and deeply moving book. And I would like first to congratulate Luis for producing such an important and timely contribution to the study of displacement. So Long Journey Home offer us a powerful exploration of what displacement means when it is experienced not simply as the loss of land or housing, but as a loss of home, as a social, emotional, and existential world. The book draws on long-term engagement with internally displaced people in Colombia and presents a careful ethnographic account of how conflict disrupts not only people's material lives, but also their relationships, identities, and sense of belonging. And what I find particularly compelling is that the book encourages us to rethink displacement in a more profound way. So rather than treating displacement primarily as a humanitarian problem of shelter, poverty, or service provision, so the book invites us to consider displacement as a eruption in the very conditions that make life feel inhabitable and meaningful. So in my brief remarks today, I would like to do three things. First, I would like to highlight what I see as several of the book's key conceptual contributions. Second, I will situate the book within broader debates on violence, trauma, and displacement. And finally, I will offer a few reflections and questions that might help open our discussion. So let me begin with what I see as the central contribution of the book. So the author argues that the most fundamental dimensions of displacement is the loss of home. And in much of the policy and academic literature, displacement tends to be analyzed through measurable forms of loss. Researchers often focus on the loss of housing, land, employment, or livelihoods. And these are, of course, very important dimensions of displacement. But for me, the book suggests that this approach is captured only part of the experience. What is lost in displacement is not simply a house or a plot of land. And what is lost is something much deeper. It is the web of relationships, memories, attachments, and routines that make a place feel like home. In other words, displacement involves the destruction of what we might call a social and existential infrastructure. Home, as the book shows, is not merely a physical structure. It is also a site of belonging, identity, and emotional attachment. It is where people build relationships, construct memories, and develop a sense of stability in the world. So when displacement occurs, the structures of meaning are profoundly disrupted. So people do not simply lose a location, they lose a world. This reframing is extremely important because it moves the study of displacement beyond purely material indicators and pushes us to consider the human and existential dimensions of displacement. A second major contribution of the book is its emphasis on displacement as a long-term social process rather than a single event. So we see that the author proposes a framework that describes displacement as involving three interconnected stages. The first is losing home, the second living without home, and the third remaking home. So this temporal framing is very powerful because it allows us to see displacement as unfolding over time. The moment of forced departure is only the beginning. After that initial rupture, displaced people often enter prolonged periods of uncertainty, instability, and social marginalization. They must learn how to live without the structures that previously organized their lives. And eventually, many attempt to reconstruct forms of home in new places. But this process is rarely linear or complete. Remaking home may take years or decades, and in some cases, it may remain partial or fragile. So what the book captures beautifully is the everyday labor involved in a rebuilding life after displacement, the efforts to re-establish relationship, recreate routines, and rebuild a sense of belonging. So this emphasis on temporality helps us to understand displacement as a continuing condition rather than a single moment of, let's say, crisis. A third important contribution concerns the experience of internally displaced people. So unlike refugees, internally displaced people remain within the borders of their own country. Because of this, they're often assumed to remain at home in a national sense, but the narratives presented in the book challenge this assumption. They show that people can become deeply alienated and marginalized within their own home country. Displaced individuals frequently encounter discrimination, economic exclusion, and social stigma in the places where they settle. They might find themselves living in unfamiliar urban environments where they lack social networks and support networks as well. As a result, they experience a profound sense of estrangement. In this sense, internally displaced people can become foreigners in their own country. This insight is particularly significant because it highlights the limits of national belonging as a guarantee of home. So remaining within the borders of a country does not necessarily mean remaining socially or emotionally at home. Another strength of the book is its multidimensional conceptualization of home. Home is presented not only as a material structure, but also as a set of emotional, social, and existential relationships. So this allows the author to distinguish between different dimensions of home, including material home, emotional home, and what we might call existential home, the sense of having a place where one's life feels meaningful and grounded. So this distinction helps us understand how people can be physically sheltered but still experience a deep sense of homelessness. So housing reconstruction, for example, does not automatically restore the deeper meanings associated with home. Home must also be rebuilt through relationships, memory, and social life. So let me now briefly situate the book within broader debates on violence and displacement. So anthropological scholarship has long emphasized that violence does not simply produce physical destruction, it also reshapes social worlds and everyday life. So our works have shown how violence enters the intimate space of everyday existence, transforming how people inhabit the world around them. And from this perspective, displacement can be understood as part of a broader process through which violence disrupts ordinary life. The destruction of home is therefore not only a special displacement, but also a disruption of the life worlds through which people organize their experiences. So this perspective helps us see displacement as a form of social and existential dislocation. So the book also resonates with debates on trauma. So trauma scholarship emphasizes that traumatic events are not confined to the past. Instead, they continue to shape how people experience the present and imagine the future. In the context of displacement, violence does not end when people leave the place where it occurred. Its effects continue to unfold through memory, fear, and uncertainty. Displacement therefore becomes one of the ways in which the past persists in the present. The narratives presented in the book illustrate how memories of violence and loss remain embedded in people's everyday life, shaping how they relate to new places and new communities. At the same time, the book highlights the agency of displaced people. Rather than portraying them simply as passive victims of violence, the ethnographic accounts reveal how individuals and communities actively attempt to rebuild their lives. This emphasis resonates with scholars with works such as Lisa Malki, who have criticized humanitarian narratives that portray displaced populations as voiceless or dependent. In contrast, A Long Journey Home shows that displaced people engage in continuous practices of homemaking. They create new social networks, develop new routines, and gradually construct new forms of belonging. These processes may be fragile and incomplete, but they demonstrate the remarkable capacity of individuals and communities to rebuild meaning under extremely difficult circumstances. Let me now conclude with a reflection and question that I hope it might stimulate discussion. So the book places a great emphasis on memory and an enduring significance of the lost home. So I would be interested to hear more about the role of nostalgia in this process. Do memories of the lost home always help sustain identity and belonging, or can they sometimes make it more difficult for displaced people to build attachments to new places? Also, the book emphasizes the possibility of reconstructing home after a displacement. But are there situations where home cannot fully be remade? Are there forms of displacement that produce a more permanent sense of existential homelessness? And what might this mean for how we think about justice, repair, and long-term recovery after violence? So, to conclude, A Long Journey Home is a deeply insightful and compassionate book. It reminds us that displacement is not only about movement across space, but also about the disruption and gradual reconstruction of the world that people inhabit. So by placing the concept of home at the center of the analysis, this book offers a powerful framework for understanding the human consequences of conflict and displacement. So I look forward very much to hear the author's reflections and the conversation that will follow. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Evgenia. Equally amazing journey into new questions and insights and kind of synthetic reflections of so much of the strengths of the book and the possibilities and contributions and potential for future work. Really amazing. Thank you so much. I want to maximize our celebration by making sure that I give plenty of time to Luis to reflect back, but I'm also consciously aware of the time. And although I'm not going to stop anybody at the end of the clock ticking, I want to offer the audience an opportunity to raise any questions or make any interventions or reflections, and then I'll collate those and then pass over to Luis, and then I will I'm not going to self-censor, but I will try to control myself from asking questions and possibly meet Luis for a coffee catch-up instead, and then have him all to myself for a full hour. Rima, you go ahead.
I'm more than happy for your question to take precedence to mine, Anastasia, because this is so much in your wheelhouse. I teach on a lot of these themes, but it's not hugely central to my own research. But this is something that you could perhaps talk about endlessly, Louise. But how transformative personally was the research? I'm sure you've been asked this so many times. How transformative personally was the research for you, and sort of the second living of the research through the process of writing the book, sort of given all of these, and not to be sort of dour, but the expressions of sadness, of embodied violence, of the unbelonging expressed by participants like Matteo, because just reading sort of his vignettes was quite moving for me. So yeah, that was my question, but equally happy for Anastasia or Paula or Lily or Myra or Johan or anyone else to go first. But I would love to hear your response to Evgenia's, of course.
Great. Thank you, Rima. Any other interventions, questions, clarifications? Johan, please go ahead.
Oh, yeah, not so much for clarification, but do have a few questions, but maybe I should, do you want me to put them now or? Yeah.
Yes, please. And then I'm going to give a lot of space for Luis to
respond to everything. Okay,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So I thank you very much. I thought it was really, really interesting, very fascinating. I do a lot of work on the concept of home from a more philosophical point of view, so less empirical. And I work with a lot with the concept of home as it's developed in the utopian philosophy of Ernst Bloch, where a home is a place where we have never been. So Bloch says that the home shines into the childhood of all of us, but we've never been there. And it seems to me that dynamic, all the time people talk about home, there is this dynamic of I was there and I'm no longer there, but I've never really been there and I have to make it. So I thought it was really interesting that you use this notion of liminality to conceptualize home. And I would just like to, from that point of view, to ask you the question: to what extent in the data, if I can call it that you have collected, is by the participants themselves home equated sometimes with what is familiar? And I think there's a big difference between what is home and what is familiar. Because what is familiar, of course, is what we can lose, and then we lose capabilities of agency, and we have to rebuild them, and that takes a very long time. But that's something else. I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Is that what home is, or is home something else than the familiar? And I think this question of nostalgia plays a big role there. I also thought of the work of Svetlana Boym on Soviet immigrants in New York who built their flats like they were in the Soviet era. But that's also an example of creating a past that was never there. So this the relation between home and the familiar, and home is a place where we've never been.
Anastasia, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Johan. I just got a great idea for the future. We should definitely have an interdisciplinary online roundtable on what is home, yesterday, today, tomorrow, from an interdisciplinary perspective, and invite philosophers, ethnographers, anthropologists, historians, everybody, and just have and make sure we plan it for 2 hours, because 1 hour is not enough, and have another go. But for now, I want to give Luis plenty of time to reflect back. And then we're slowly going to wind down. It's okay to go over the time. Let's place it a maximum at 10 past, 15 past, only for me to grab a coffee before my next meeting, if that's okay. And then we can hope for a future roundtable. I'm really excited with that prospect. Luis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anastasia. I am also already excited about the idea of the round table. And thank you all for your questions. So I will start in order. And thank you, Evgenia, for your comments and for your questions. So the question about nostalgia. This is a very interesting aspect that when I was doing the research, I very much engaged with Gas and Hash idea of nostalgia. And this very aspect that nostalgia doesn't necessarily mean to go back to the previous state of your life or to your previous home makes a lot of sense for me, because at the very beginning, I was just kind of going into the literature and assuming that maybe people who feel displaced all the time for 10, 20 or 30 years want to go back there. But then got some harsh idea of nostalgia. Nostalgia could be something else. So this idea of future-oriented nostalgia makes a lot of sense in this particular area of research because people navigate the tension between no longer feeling at home in the place left behind because of the memories of violence, or because they were, for example, some people were able to go back and experience violence again, a new displacement, or really couldn't navigate the experience they have in that particular place. So they want something similar to the idea of home they have in the past, but locating that in the future. The future could be now, as Patti Smith said, but for many of these people, the future is certainly very, very uncertain. So keep in this memory, this illusion, this imagination of the home, but trying to put this somewhere else. The second aspect about the impossibility to remain home for some people. Thank you for that question, Evgenia, because for most of the people I interviewed, they had been not able to remake a sense of home. And so the experience of violence really play a significant role in the way people can remake the feeling of being at home. All the participants maximum after 2 years, were able to rebuild the shelter, the house, to create a space where they can live, have engaged with the labor market, feed their family. All these aspects, which are very important, took about 2 years maximum. But then I was kind of, why, if you have been living in this place, in this neighborhood for 20 years, why don't you really feel at home? So the community became something very important, and here ethnicity is a key factor. So just to try to keep the answer short, I will say, for example, for indigenous and black communities who have a very, they call a circular way of life. Many indigenous and Afro-Colombians in the country have this tradition. So you have to go back to the place you were born because there is something there waiting for you. In the book, I describe, for example, the narrative of a black man whose umbilical cord is on a piece of land in his community of origin, and then the family plant a tree. So for them, going back there is an existential need. So he had been very successful in Bogota, have a very professional job. He's happy with that, but he's always missing to going back there, and he can't because of the violence. So he said, I have the physical shelter here, but spiritually, I feel so disconnected in this city. And existentially, this is not my home. I believe, he said, as I describe in the book, that my home is part in that particular tree, in that particular region. The problem is that we just overemphasize this idea. Most of mestizos, people who experience, for example, witnessing the murder of their parents, and as I mentioned before, women who were raped, consistently don't want to go back there. And they had been really struggling to remake the sense of being at home because they believe their bodies had been destroyed physically and emotionally. And so you live all the time with the tension. And it's more critical when women became pregnant after the rape and they had been living with their children and grandchildren, navigating all this experience of trauma and violence. Of course, we cannot take trauma for granted, but in these particular cases, for example, a woman who was raped for 18 men in a single day and then raped again in the same week, the feeling of making a new home for her is like, I am not really even concerned about that. I want to live today, to end my day today, because she had been trying to commit suicide twice. So for her to be alive, even without a home, makes kind of perfect sense. The idea of how transformative has been my research. Thank you, Rima, for that question. It can definitely take an hour because it has been 10 years. At the very beginning, not so happy we can just have the coffee with Anastasia and all of you. So at the very beginning, I am from Colombia. I kind of understand the culture and I have been very familiar with the experience of violence in the country. So I thought I was absolutely well prepared to go into the field and to learn from people's experience. But it was really, really touching because it was worse than I even expected. So for example, I just mentioned this woman I interviewed that was raped for. I couldn't really imagine that. So this idea of just stopping the interview, I asked her to stop the interview because she was just crying, but I was also about to cry, and it was stopping the interview was a good point for both of us. But she said, no, I want to continue. So both of us were crying. And you know, when you have training as an anthropologist, it's supposed that you are completely like a machine, no emotions in the field. But emotions, indeed, in the field is the way you learn from this common humanity. So at the very beginning of my field work, I struggled myself and I did kind of lots of classes, exercise, talking with my partner all the time was very helpful. But then in the second part of the field, I was thinking that I was better prepared. But then no, more surprises because you become kind of a friend with the research participants. So they share with you things that they didn't share the first time. And there is also brutal violence. So again, navigating these experiences are very difficult emotionally, but at the same time very inspiring. And I will say honestly, it has been very transformative for me because I find myself often complaining about very stupid things. I still do these kind of things. But when I see these inspiring people whose family has been killed, women who have been raped, and have the strength to wake up and do things during the morning, I say I have no right to complain. So it has been a source of inspiration. And for example, when I share the outcome of the research with them, it's a very fascinating process because they often thank you, Eduardo, you have been working with me for 10 years. And I can really understand how people just say me thank you. Thank you, you have been really supportive with my research. And I believe we are learning from each other. Of course, I am taking part of what is their narratives with their permission to create and to build my academic career. And you feel that there is some ethics there that you need to discuss because of course I am not selling this book, so it's not about that, and they have this clear, but you feel that with all the narratives of the people you are building your career, but when you're going back they are in the same situation and even worse. So there are lots of ethical questions about doing fieldwork with people who have been victims of human rights abuses, who have been trying to rebuild their life, and to trust you, perhaps they have really the feeling that you can do something, but they know that the only thing I can really do is talk about their experience and trying to inspire other people to go into these kind of things. Finally, Johan, thank you for your question. It's a very difficult one. I agree, this idea of liminality can bring us new ideas beyond the sense of familiarity. Many scholars, as you already mentioned, often conceptualize home as a secure space, as a place which is familiar, and a place that you have control. My colleague Paolo Boccagni, for example, have this framework, which is so significant, but doesn't necessarily work for every situation. So when you look, for example, at the experience of internally displaced people, or in general, people who fled because of violence, the familiarity, if ever, plays a very secondary role, and it's changed depending if you are able to move with your family or not. If your family are killed, the familiarity no longer exists. You are navigating a new place, trying to develop what Professor Massey calls a sense of place. And I am bringing this concept here along with liminality because I do believe they have a lot of potential to say things about home. Where do you feel at home? Where you are living with your family, sometimes your family no longer exists, or depending on your life, if you have a very mobile life, your family may be here, maybe here, you are traveling with the idea of the family. Or how do you connect with different places? Sometimes very ordinary practices, a trip, having a coffee in your favorite coffee, or these kind of things can bring the feeling of being at home. That is not necessarily your place, the place you feel connected, the place you are yearning for, or you have any route, but you can experience home there. But that some people who have never migrated, or in the case that you suggested, yearning for a place you had never been. You can experience that, for example, with first and second generation. So children who have never been in their parents' home, but all the times are thinking about this home because the experience of displacement as Professor Oliver Bailey highlights, can be inherited. So this missing something that you don't really understand, which is in your brain and in your heart or both, can be really passing through generations. And the case of Palestinians that perhaps we are all very familiar with is a great example of that. Places that you had never visited for 70 years, but you are still feeling that is your emotional, spiritual, and I will say existential home. So my last aspect that I want to say at the end, what I have learned, Rima, with talking with research participants, is that they don't only need food and shelter, as is often taken for granted by development actors, policymakers, humanitarian organizations. They need to reveal something that we cannot see. This internal sense of being in a place in which you feel your life, as you highlighted, Eugenia, is fulfilled with meaning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Luis. That was an equally amazing new journey into new territories. Just really fantastic. Um, Gosh, I could go on for hours, but I have to grab coffee and get ready to chair my next meeting. It has been an absolute delight and pleasure. For those of you who might have not known, the book is open access. Please disseminate as widely as possible. It's good for our library to purchase it and to have it on our reading list. It's so meaningful across many modules in the School of Law and Social Sciences, but also education and other programs and departments. And really important to know what's happening in beloved Colombia, the experiences of people throughout the decades has been heart-wrenching, but their resilience and their humanity has been an inspirational compass to the rest of us. And I know the guilt, Luis, and the ethical dilemmas, but you are also an instrument of truth and co-production and a communicative intellectual device for the rest of the world to hear Mateo's stories and other stories of your many participants. And I know it's not just 100, it's so many more, but these are representations of stories of livelihoods interrupted and hope for the future, for new lives to be remade, possibly lost, but maybe remade in hope and peace and dignity. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. And let's put in the plans and the gears for the roundtable. It would be wonderful to have SPRC organize it. We can make it a mini workshop and have our students involved, have breakout rooms, showcase a lot of work across many, many disciplines, but also everyday life, because we all at the end might be in search for a home or having homing experiences or longing for home. It is a very central concept to every single human being. Thank you, Luis. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Anastasia.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very
all.
much.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much for
Anastasia.
being us today.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Nice to meet
Thank
you all.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
It's
Bye,
been
Anastasia.
amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luis. It's been really great. I really enjoyed it. Did you enjoy it?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I was so pleased with the opportunity, with the questions. Thank you. I can really thank you enough. Just keep in touch. And yes, I really want to learn more from your research, and hopefully we can have this coffee in person soon.
Absolutely. I would love to. My pleasure. You stay safe and take very good care.
Thank you, Anastasia. Thank you so much. See you later.
See you
Bye-bye.
later.
Thanks
Bye
for
bye.
everything. Bye.
Pleasure.